Right, welcome everyone to our September DevOps Vancouver Meetup with two really exciting and insightful sessions. So let me cover a few housekeeping items to get started. So just to note, this session is being recorded and we will be sharing the recording on our Meetup YouTube channel in a month's time. Please mute your microphones during the presentations and remember to unmute for Q&A. Now, today for the first session, which is really an interactive discussion with Donovan, please unmute, raise your virtual hand and or type your question into the chat so that Shay and I can bubble them up for you in the discussion. As always, we need your kind of feedback to improve the meetup and your ideas for future sessions. And apologies from our host, Andrei Kaminsky, who is missing today's meetup due to a family emergency and is unfortunately unable to share his usual nuggets on DevOps. So instead, Shay and I thought that we'll give you a quick peek at what we've got planned, in brackets subject to change, for October and November meetups. So in October, we will have a presentation by Sudhir Jangir, CTO and co-founder of Roost, and Owen Rogers, who will be discussing 6 ways that DevOps can tackle climate change. In November, Scott Ambler will discuss how to bring databases into DevOps, and Michael Kaufmann will share his experience of writing the latest Accelerate DevOps with GitHub book. And kudos to Michael Kaufmann, because he'll actually be doing it from Germany, which I think is about 4 a.m. his time.
Oh.
And for 2023, we are still mulling over how to change our virtual meetup to a virtual and in-person meetup. So just watch the space and obviously share your feedback on that as well. Right. For our first session, I'm stoked and excited to introduce Donovan Brown, the man in the black shirt. I'm happy you're wearing a black shirt today, Donovan. The author of the DevOps definition in one crisp sentence, former ALM Ranger, partner program manager in the Azure CTO incubations team at Microsoft, and ranked as high as 11th in the world of professional air hockey players. Always an important stat. So based on the recording of a recent session at WorkSafe BC, which we've shared with all the meetup members, Donovan will answer all your questions and probably more in context of the digital transformation, why it is imperative to survive, what is possible, what is not, and even drift into table hockey for those that are eager to challenge him for a game. In brackets, I would not recommend you do it. So Donovan, could I hand over the virtual floor to you and start the discussion with a burning question? With everything you have experienced with digital transformations since publishing your definition of DevOps a mere 7 years ago, would you tweak the definition at all?
I think the only thing I might have done differently is switched products for tools, only because so many people find that they want to change the word from products to tools. But I push back on that. I'm like, it's not really a tool alone that actually does it, right? And I use the analogy of a hammer and a saw, right? A hammer, clearly a tool. A saw, clearly a tool. Did they build your house? The answer is no. A carpenter built your house, and it swung a hammer, and it used a saw, it used all the tools. So a tool alone will not build you a CI/CD pipeline. A tool alone will not get your code into production. Bash is a tool. I would not recommend you building an entire CI/CD pipeline out of Bash alone, but you will use Bash as part of that process. And you need a product like GitHub Workflows or Azure Pipelines to actually bring together all those tools to actually make them do something that's useful and to get your code into production. So a lot of people want to change it, but then when I explain to them why I chose products instead of tools, they're kind of like, oh, I kind of get it. But I'm like, yeah, but everyone wants to change that freaking last P from products to tools. So part of me is like, maybe I should have just given in and changed it to tools, but it is the way that it is for a reason. And I think I wrote a blog post on Medium on like dissecting that definition, explaining like why I chose every word and why it's still rings true to this very day. I started implementing it for Web3, right? So in the incubations, we're looking at all new and crazy stuff. And I got tagged for Web3. It's like, Donovan, go figure this stuff out. Like, all right, cool. So I go and I start doing all this research in Web3 and what it takes to write smart contracts and the Ethereum blockchain. And I realized that no one was doing DevOps. Everyone was just like, yeah, you just type here inside of this particular editor, and then you just push it straight to the blockchain. I'm like, and then you get pwned, right? Then you get completely taken advantage of, and you lose all of your Ethereum because you wrote something and you didn't test it and you pushed it straight to mainnet. I'm like, why didn't you push it to Ganache first? Why didn't you push it to Rinkeby first? Why didn't you actually go through the best practices that we've proven work for every type of software that you write? Why did you think that Web3 was special and didn't need a dev environment, didn't need a QA environment before it got pushed to mainnet? So I said, why is no one doing this? And this is scary to me. So now on Medium, there's a 10-part series of me taking Truffle and actually saying, this is a Truffle project. Let me show you how to actually push it to a dev environment using all obviously Azure technology, right? So we're taking Azure Static Web Apps, which is like purposely built to host a DApp, in my opinion, right? Because a DApp is just basically a static front end talking to Ethereum blockchain through usually Web3.js or through, what's the other one? It's another really popular one, Ethers.js. And these are just JavaScript frameworks that you use in your SPA to call down into your blockchain. So Azure Static Web Apps, purpose built to have SPAs. And then when I needed Ganache, which is a temporary blockchain, what I did is I spun up Azure container instances. And I just basically ran the container in there and now have this beautiful dev environment where I can actually test it and actually see that it actually works the way it's supposed to. My devs can come and it's like, yep, everything integrates great. Then I can move it over to QA I used Azure DevOps instead of GitHub Actions. We can talk about that later. But I used Azure DevOps first, and then all of a sudden it's like sitting inside of Rinkeby, right? So now that's truly a test network, and it's normal blockchain, but it's not real Ether. So I don't have to worry about vulnerabilities emptying out my cryptocurrency. And you can test it again in that environment and get approvals. And once you get an approval, then we go and we finally deploy it to mainnet. And people are like freaking out over this. Like, it's revolutionary. I'm like, this isn't revolutionary. Like you just said, I wrote the definition 7 years ago. This existed 10 years ago. How is Web3 not doing this? Like, how is anyone who is writing software not using the best practices? Because to me, it was just dumbfounding to me. And what's really cool is that's got me a lot of attention. So I'm working with Consensus, who actually wrote Truffle and Ganache and all those tools. Like, Donovan, like, let's just make sure everyone in the world knows about this stuff. I'm like, and part of me sad. I'm like, everyone in the world should already know about this stuff. It's not like it's a secret. Like, DevOps is not a secret. We've been talking about this forever. How are people still right-click publishing their software versus using DevOps best practice? So would I tweak the definition? No, because I've applied it for mobile. I've applied it for database. I've applied it when it comes to security. I've applied it now with Web3, which is the bleeding edge that I can get to right now. And if I ever get asked to do anything with quantum computing, the first thing I'm going to figure out is how do I put this in a pipeline so I can make sure that what I deploy is good. Is there any business size threshold where DevOps starts to become a must-have? Yeah, size of 1. That's a really good question. People always ask me, Donovan, I'm only one person. Should I be using DevOps? And I say, yes. The reason why is because you play how you practice. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before, that you need to make this muscle memory. And even myself, like I ran a website called DLB Racing for about 20 years. And I just sunsetted right at the beginning of the pandemic. People weren't racing cars anymore. My customers were dwindling, and it was more like a hobby than it was a real business where I was going to ever retire from it. So I was like, okay, I've had enough. But for the entire time that it was running, I was the only developer. I was pushing into a dev environment. I made a commit to a repo, and then it went through and ran all the automated tests, and then it went to QA, and I would test it one last time and make sure that all my migrations were going to work and my database was going to get updated. And then finally it went into production. It was beautiful. But I was a developer of like a team of size 1. But why would I, even as a single individual, want to potentially miss a step that a computer would happily do for me perfectly every single time? I'm tired, it's 3 in the morning. I want to do these deployments off hours because I'm a human being and I'm going to make a mistake. So I'm going to need time to go back in and correct that mistake while no one's on the site. And it was just like, why would I do this to myself? When Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions or Jenkins or whatever tool you want to use will happily do the exact same steps perfectly for you every single time, as often as you need to. Why in the world would I put that extra stress on me to do that? So I automate everything. I have repos all over the place with pipelines all over the place because I'm thinking, why would I ever want to do that? And that way, when I do go get into a large organization, I can look at their pipeline and say, okay, there's lots of ways here that we can optimize this, because here's an example. And I can point them to an actual example of pushing code into production that looks exactly like the code that you're doing. And because I practice and I play the same way, then all of a sudden it just works. Same thing with unit testing. A lot of people are like, oh, when I'm just prototyping, I don't unit test. I'm like, why? Like, you should be writing unit tests all the time, because the more you write them, the faster you get at them, the better you get at writing software. Because a lot of people will pass really big, heavy, fat objects into methods that should only have business logic. And now when you want to test it, you have to mock out all of that nonsense, right? And mocking it out takes a lot of time, and it's very difficult and it's error prone. But wouldn't it have been better just to pass in a sterilized string or an int or some type of integral type into that method that then would be easy to test without having to mock out all this other nonsense? But a lot of people don't do that. So I'm a big fan of, I play how I practice. So even if I'm an individual of one size, a team of one, I'm going to be using DevOps. I'm going to be writing tests. I'm just going to do the same things I would do if I was on a team of 1,000. Like, why would I do anything different when I'm on a team of one? Because I want to be good at that stuff. So my answer is, I don't care what size team you're on. You doing continuous integration, you doing continuous delivery is going to add value to your process. I saw that question pop across. I saw some others come across, but I wasn't able to read them. So I'll need you to read them out for me, really. And hopefully that answered the question. If it didn't answer a question, feel free to double click and say, well, that's not what I meant, or can you expand on something? I'd be more than happy to. Yeah, you're muted, Willie.
Answered it beautifully.
I've done it again. Yeah, no, Martin, I was just about to say is please unmute and just jump in with your question. The second one's from you too.
Yeah, every size organization, like I do it myself. And I think what's funny about it is the more I do it, I start pushing the envelope even further. Like, oh, I bet you I could do this. Oh, I bet I can make it do this. Because I remember one of the coolest pipelines I ever built. Again, I was the only person on this team. And I was thinking, man, if I truly had a disaster, and that's my first thought, my mindset, whenever I'm thinking about building a CI/CD pipeline, my first thought is, how will I recover from a disaster? Not just how do I get my code into production, right? Because if the infrastructure already exists, you get really lazy, you skip over infrastructure as code, and you just start writing Xcopy commands all over the place, right? A little .NET build and a .NET publish and then a .NET, like, no. Imagine the entire region where your code runs is gone. And the reason that I started thinking this way is because it happened. Does everyone remember when San Antonio got struck by lightning and that entire data center disappeared? Like, off of the map, that data center gone. So if all your resources were in that data center, you now had to stand up your entire infrastructure in another region while we had to go back in and figure out why San Antonio got struck by lightning and the HVAC went off and the whole freaking thing wanted to start to melt down. It's a scary situation. So whenever I think about a pipeline, my first thought is, how do I recover from a disaster? So I start thinking about infrastructure as code, because I do not want to have to go into the portal and manually try to configure an AKS cluster correctly so I can then deploy my application into it, right? Because if I'm under pressure, if I'm scared, if my manager's over my neck and customers are calling and the emails are coming in, I'm not about to go do that correctly. I'm about to go screw that up. So I'm going to be trying to go really fast, cutting corners, and all of a sudden I didn't set up RBAC right inside of my Kubernetes cluster, and then none of my apps are running, and I'm even worse shape than I was before. But if I automate the deployment of that AKS cluster, you know what that becomes? I click a button, everyone goes back and calms down while my pipeline runs, deploys all my infrastructure correctly, and then deploys my app inside of it. But there was one piece missing when I did that. The DNS record that I had was still pointing at the wrong IP address, because I now had stood up an entirely new environment, all new IP addresses. Like, man, there has to be a way for me to be able to figure this out. So I was using GoDaddy as my DNS server. Lo and behold, GoDaddy has a REST API. I was like, oh yeah, if there's a REST API, I can do this from my pipeline. So what did I do? I literally spun up an entire new infrastructure. I query my AKS cluster for the service IP address. I then use the REST API for GoDaddy, and I update the DNS record from my CI/CD pipeline to point at the new IP address. So there was literally zero human intervention. You could actually torch whatever region I was in. I could push a build that says requeue my build, and within 10 minutes, as soon as the DNS records replicated, everyone was back up and running again. No human intervention besides clicking a button. Like, that to me is the holy grail. And the only reason I got that far is because I was doing it on my own. Imagine trying to get permission to go do this kind of research on a team that's trying to deliver value every week. But when I can go ahead and say, I already know how to do this, right? I've already done this before this. I don't have to go do the experiment that you wanted me to do. I don't have to stop delivering value. Here's an example of exactly what I'm talking about. Then it's a lot easier for me to go ahead and make that change versus me having to lose time figuring out how to make that change or trying to convince my team that it is possible, even though I've never done it before. All the stuff I want to do, I've already done it. Here's an example, and now I'm going to show you how to do it in your pipeline too.
But how do you convince like a startup, somebody that's never faced that, dire situation where things just went sideways?
Yeah, it's tough. No, you're absolutely right? It's like, I'm old. Like, people don't realize how old I am. I'm almost 50 years old. So I've burned myself a lot, right? I have done all the stupid mistakes already. That's why I live and die by unit test. That's why I live and die by CI/CD, because I've already lived that. So you're bringing up a really good point. I've never experienced this pain that you claim is going to happen one day. So I'm not motivated to go and make these changes. So what we have to do is make it just drop dead easy to do the right thing, right? If it's not difficult to do the right thing, you would just do it already. What they're afraid of and what they've been conditioned to believe is that to do a really sophisticated CI/CD pipeline is hard. It's time consuming, and we don't have that kind of time. We're a startup. We got to be innovating. We got to outpace our competition. What they don't realize is to do that, to outpace your competition, you need a CI/CD pipeline. You need no manual people doing this. You need this to be moving as fast as possible to where all a developer has to do. And this is a litmus test I tell everyone. Whenever I used to do EBCs like crazy when I lived in Seattle. An EBC is an executive briefing where you have to go and talk to, like, you name it. I've spoken to NATO and governments, like, it's crazy. But you go and you talk to them about stuff. And they're like, so Donovan, how can we kind of gauge where we are on DevOps? I'm like, what does a developer have to do to get code into production? And then they just start rattling off all this crap they have to do. I'm like, the answer should have been commit code to a repository. That's all I should have to do as a developer. I shouldn't have to know what CI/CD system you're using. I shouldn't have to know how the infrastructure is being provisioned. As a developer, all I should have to do to get one of my changes into production is to merge it into the right branch. Then the rest of that stuff should just be magic. So if your developers are doing anything more than simply submitting a PR to get into production, you still have a lot of room to grow. Not that you're doing anything wrong, but there's a lot of room you can go, because that's the ultimate goal for me as a developer. I have a work item, I break it down, I commit my changes, the PR gets approved, and at some point later, without any more intervention from me, my code should show up in production, right? That's the holy grail for me. And if a disaster happens, because you're talking about, again, you're reminding me of all the war stories of the site goes down and what happens? Everyone has to come into the office. Your manager orders takeout, because no one's leaving till this is fixed. So at least they're going to buy us pizza or Chinese food or whatever they can get into the office at whatever hour that we're in there. And you all stay there all night long, all trying to get this thing fixed. And now what you can do, if you do everything that we've been trying to tell you to do for the last decade, it's like, everyone go to sleep and relax. Like, I'm just going to push this button here. Like, no one else has to do anything. If you want to stay up and watch it, you can, but we've seen this work week after week after week, month after month after month. We do deployments every single day. A disaster recovery for us is just a deployment. And we do these deployments multiple times a day. So that's why I'm such a big proponent of DevOps. Like, it gives my peers their nights and their weekends back. There's a horror story that I tell about when I finally decided I had to quit a job. We had been burning the midnight oil. I mean, we're talking 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, just constantly. We're just going home zombies. And I realized that I'd been doing this for so long that I didn't have any food at home. So I'm in, I think, like a 24-hour Walmart or some type of grocery store, and I'm trying to get food so I can go home and eat, because I haven't been home in like a week trying to get this stupid product out. And then all of a sudden my phone rings, and it's my boss. It's like 3 o'clock in the morning, saying I need to come back to the office. And I have to leave a grocery bag full of food in the middle of the grocery store so I can get back to work. And I was realized, like, there has to be a better way. There has to be. And this was before I was into DevOps. This was before I was into process. And that's when I realized, like, I got to get my friends and my peers, their nights and their weekends back, time with their family back, time to go home and eat. Like, we got to get these people the time back, because being a developer is an amazing experience, but it can also be miserable, right? If you're on the wrong team, if you don't have the process in place, we lose a lot of good developers because they're just on teams that just don't know how to run themselves. So yeah, that's just one of the reasons why that definition is so passionate for me, why it took so long to craft it, is because I was reaching back into my own past. I was reaching back into, like, how can we make DevOps something that just makes everyone's life better? The end user's life is better, the developer's life is better, which is another reason I'm a huge proponent of Scrum as well. I'm a certified Scrum Master, have been since I think 2010, I think I got certified. And I got to kind of put on that hat recently, because inside Incubations, we have this project I don't know if I can say even the code name yet. I think we're going through patenting, so I can't say it, but what there's 3 young teams and they all want to implement Scrum. And I started being able to be their Scrum coach for the last 2 weeks. It's been awesome, right? To go back and like flex those muscles again. But again, it's like, you can see how excited they are to realize that, wow, like if we follow this process, we go home at a regular time and we still get stuff built. I'm like, yeah. And to me, to be really, really good at DevOps, you have to first be really, really good at Agile. Like you have to be producing these increments of shippable software. And when you have that increment of shippable software, you know really quickly if you're good at DevOps or not, because why is it only taking us 2 weeks to produce the value, but 4 months to deploy the value, right? Because that's what you're missing. Like you got the Scrum part good, but you got the deployment part. It's horrible, and we got to go fix that stuff for you as well. So to me, going from a Scrum master to a DevOps guy was like the natural progression for me.
How do you tie in the branching strategy then? Because with that CI/CD, you're pushing stuff out constantly.
Yep.
And it has to build, has to run in production.
Yep.
So
oh, great.
You have to think about branching.
There's a couple of things there. It's funny because if you look back, one of the first things that I used from the Rangers was the branching guide. Like that's what brought me onto their radar. I was like, holy crap, I need to learn branching. And then the Rangers had this branching guide. And like, oh, I want to be a part of the team that actually like helped to build this kind of content, which is why I joined the Rangers. But that's evolved a lot. Right? Like that branching guide now, I don't know that I would recommend what we wrote. What was that? My God, how long ago was it? 12 years ago? It was a long time ago that branching guide was written.
Yeah, 2008, I think.
Yeah, so like it's a long time ago. But now most of us are doing trunk-based deployments, like trunk-based development with very short-lived feature branches, right? And that's fine. Right. And the way that you get around making sure that everything in main is deployable, okay, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying runnable. I'm saying the code is deployable. Is you're using things like feature flags, right? So feature flags give me the ability to actually deploy code before I release code. And I love that flexibility there, because in the past, before feature flags, as soon as that code was on that server, it was deployed and released. Like there was no way to stop someone from using it. So like you had to be bulletproof and ready to go. And unfortunately, what that led to was really long-lived branches. The branch lived until it was ready to actually be run and released into production. And then the merge bomb would happen when you finally tried to merge that back into your main or your trunk. It would be this explosion, and you'd spend days or if not weeks trying to fix all the merge conflicts, because we were leaving those branches out and we weren't doing the reverse and forward integrations properly. A lot of us would just stay on those branches until we were done and then realize, oh my God, every file that I changed, someone else also changed. But when we started doing short-lived feature branches and feature flags, you're able to reverse and forward integrate every day, because you're not breaking the main branch. Even if I checked in code that's not done, as long as the feature flag is off, doesn't matter. It just literally just needs to compile, right? I need to make sure that it compiles. It doesn't need to work because you're not deploying my code yet. No, you're not releasing my code yet. You're deploying it as often as you're deploying the branch, but you haven't released it yet because the flag is off. So that's how we were able to keep those short-lived feature branches and still keep main in a safe deployable state without having to worry about releasing or escaping bugs into production. And another thing that it gives you for feature flags is the fact that when you want to recover from a disaster, you just turn the flag off. Like how much cooler is that than trying to roll back? And I remember, I think it was was it Buck Hodges or was it Brian Hare? I think it was Brian Hare who said, doing a new deployment is easy. Rolling back is hard. And you're telling me that you just screwed up the easy part. That's why you have to roll back, because you didn't do the easy part. But now you think you're going to be able to do the hard part to go back and fix the database and remove columns and fix all the data. You think you're going to be able to do that, even though you couldn't do the easy part? So we said, we're not going to try to roll back anymore. We're going to start using feature flags. And if something bad happens, we're just going to turn that feature off. And we're going to be mitigated immediately, right? Just think about that. There is no rolling back. It's just turn the feature back off. And that way you're back to where you were a second ago. And the system is now stable. You can then go turn on that flag in a dev environment, QA environment, staging environment, or whatever you have available to you. Try to do a root cause analysis on why in the world did turning on that flag have that side effect. Go and push another change and then turn that flag back on again. And because we did safe deployment, and there's like a DevOps video, I used to do these interviews when I was on the Azure DevOps team with different people. And there's one video out there about safe deployment of how we actually deploy Azure DevOps through all the rings that it actually ends up in. And for the first 24 hours, it was 48 hours, first 48 hours, it lives with the Azure DevOps team. So we are ring zero. So if we screwed up, we only screwed up ourselves, which is kind of cool, because when you have to eat your own dog food, it tastes a lot better immediately.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, exactly. If I screw up means I don't get to work tomorrow, I'm not screwing up. So the quality went through the roof when you start using your own software. And the feature flags just gave it that flexibility and that confidence to go and refactor a lot. So that's how we keep the branches straight. But most of us are encouraging people to do trunk-based development, short-lived feature branches with a combination of feature flags will get you that velocity that you need and the safety that you need as well.
Yeah, so Donovan, you mentioned continuous delivery, you mentioned automation, and I mean, DevOps is really the right way to go. But then another word comes to mind, databases. And I'm always told databases are a problem. How can I possibly continuously deploy when I have a database?
Great. So there are techniques to do that. We do it in Azure DevOps, clearly. Redgate, which is, I'm a huge fan of Redgate, which is a great partner of Microsoft. They have tools out there that are designed to help you do those type of transformations in a safe way. And you also want to make sure that you're testing those types of deployments. I would have an exact replica schema-wise, and hopefully as close as I could data-wise without having any violating any privacy inside of my staging environment. Because I'd want to practice the migration, because I'm going to be changing store procedures potentially. I'm going to be changing the schema of my tables. I need to make sure that changing this doesn't break anything. So what I want to do is I want to actually practice that migration in a dev and a QA environment, run all of my integration tests, run all of my load tests, make sure that I'm not going to have any stored procedures that I didn't remember to change the column name in, right? Because the stored procedure will happily sit there dormant, knowing it will not run, right? Because you changed the column name and I'm now saying, go get that column that doesn't exist anymore. But tools like Redgate would actually go and figure that stuff out for you. Remember we had database projects? Those database projects would allow you to right click and say, I want to rename this column, and it would find it everywhere, including in your stored procedures, and make sure that it was right. Man, I loved Redgate for that. I was like, oh my goodness, because I used to lose sleep, just like, to your point, again, showing my age. Changing the database was the scariest thing I ever did. Whenever I had to change the database for any feature update, I lost sleep the night of that deployment, because I just knew that if I screwed up anything, I would know when someone started emailing me that the site didn't work anymore. Because the larger your database gets, the harder it is to remember where you're using all these columns, what stored procedures touch what triggers are firing on those columns. Like, you start to lose it because it's just so massive. But when you have a database project, it starts to give you that ability to treat your database just like you would any other piece of code, refactor it like any other piece of code, and deploy it as a DAC pack or whatever the artifact is for that particular technology inside of your CI/CD pipeline. So that's how we were doing it. We also do the database, usually, I'm trying to remember the exact order we did it, because I think we did the database last. We would do the front end first with all the flags off, and we know that it landed correctly and it's working as expected. None of these features expect a new column in the database. Then we would go and we would deploy the database, and there, like, that's the event horizon. Technically, you could roll back a front end pretty easily. You can't roll back a database. Like, that is this is it, everyone ready? Like, the database is now changed and it is now different. Let's turn on those flags to make sure everything works. If not, turn them off. And what you also have to remember is that, say, for example, you wanted to delete a column in a database, it takes 2 deployments to do that. You can't just delete it, because if you were to roll back, then all of a sudden there is no way to roll back and get that column back. So if you wanted to drop a column, you'd have to live with that column for an entire release. Just in case you had to roll back, the column they expected is still there, right? Once you're the releases away from that, even a rollback doesn't expect that column. So it changed the way that we thought about our databases. It changed the way about how we manipulated our databases, because we're also thinking about, if I have to turn a flag off and the flag thinks that there's a column there that it's not there, we're in worse shape now, and feature flags didn't save us anything. So it's not just, oh, I have feature flags, so I'm safe. Like, no, you got to think about this. You have feature flags, but make sure that your database is ready to be on either one of those flags or on or off. And it has to be that way for a while, so that when you do turn that flag on or off, what the database is supposed to looks like. So there's a little bit of technical debt that comes with it, but the velocity that you get, the ability to innovate as fast as you can, is worth the cost. There's technical debt when you use feature flags, and a lot of people don't realize that. They're like, oh, feature flags, it's like this silver bullet that just fixes everything. Like, no, like, it's an if statement. Like, let's not glorify what this thing is. It's an if statement in your code, which means you've just increased the cyclomatic complexity of that method. You now have 2 pieces of code that you have to maintain for some period of time. And you have to remember to go back and take out that feature flag, right? It's not supposed to live there forever. There's configuration that goes with it. And as some people are like, oh, well, I don't want to use them. Like, no, we'll never deploy, we'll never develop without them again. Like, because the cost, the return on your investment is so huge that it's worth every penny of it. But to your point, you have to think ahead on, what state do I need my database to be in? If something bad happens, what state do I need my database to be in? Can I be in both of those states at the same time? Great. Then this is a safe deployment. And then I can go back and say, do I still need that column? No, because you're like 2 or 3 releases away. Even if you turn off the feature flag, like no one expects that there anymore. Okay, it's probably safe for us to go ahead and remove that column and start to clean up some of the technical debt in your database.
Just
Yeah,
another
databases, that's one of the places, again, Redgate is phenomenal at this. If you're not using SQL Server, you can use things like Flyway, Liquibase. There's lots of open source technologies out there, some of them that even work against Oracle, so that you can use the same methodology. There's also migration-based versus state-based. And you'll have to get me and Steve Moraski on a call together at the same time so we can go fight over this again. We fight over this all the time. I am totally into state-based. He's totally into migrations. They both work. It's just a different way of
that was going
thinking
to be
about
my next
deployment.
question about, you know, code first and what your review is on code first and having all that built into your deployment, and the rollback is all built in there. And of course, you know, it gets more and more complicated with feature branches and the merging, and things just get horribly messed up. But
they can, but it can be managed, right? I completely agree, but I think it only gets messed up because people don't think about it until they're in a fire. They're in a firefight, right? They're trying to get their system back up and they realize they forgot something. But I think if you give it enough forethought, you can start to plan your way through this. I've used both state-based and migration-based. I still think I'm a little bit more partial to state-based, maybe because it's just the way that I started. And migrations are great with Entity Framework, code first migrations. I'm perfectly comfortable with those. And you have the up and the down, so you can kind of, theoretically roll back if you really wanted to, even the database itself. But you have to make sure that you've written the down correctly, right? And you have to test that, right? A lot of people don't test their disaster recovery or their rollback strategy. They just like fingers crossed it'll work. It's like a database backup. People take backups, but how many times have you tried to restore that backup anywhere? Like a lot of people have never tried to restore their backup. And then they realize when they actually need to restore it, it doesn't restore very well. So when I used to take backups, I used to have another SQL server and I would go and restore that backup to that SQL server and make sure everything was okay. Otherwise, I was just basically wishing and hoping that if I needed that backup, it would work. And a lot of people don't test it. So definitely test your strategy, but it's manageable. And again, the payoff is well worth the investment.
Awesome.
These are great questions. We're already 35 minutes. Okay, we only have like 10 minutes left.
Yeah, we can push it to 15 if we can keep you awake.
You keep talking about this stuff, I'm starting to get really awake. But I don't want to keep Jason either. I mean, he's here to do his stuff too. So
we've got a good question from Shay, and he said, I recently read DevOps is dead, long live platform engineering. What are your thoughts on platform engineering and the future of DevOps?
Well, tell me, maybe I don't know what platform engineering is then, because I've also heard of GitOps and DevSecOps and DevBizOps and anything you want in between the ops, like nonsense. So someone give me a definition of what platform, what did you call it again? Platform
engineering.
Yeah, what is that? How is that different than?
I'll let Shay explain.
Is it infrastructure as code or what?
Donovan, actually, this was the main reason why I thought I would ask you, because I figured you might have something really interesting to share about this. So from what I gathered, so this was like, this took birth on a Reddit thread that had like a lot of spirited discussions from people with a lot of differing opinions, right? So essentially, what I gathered was platform engineering is more focused on designing and building tool chains and workflows. But the focus is almost entirely self-service. And the point is, the point that the author is trying to make is that developers don't really want to deal with infrastructure. Developers don't really want to deal with ops. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Like, I mean, has that been your experience?
Okay, so I think those last two statements you made, I think are true, right? I don't know all the different layers of a network. I honestly don't. And I know I need Kubernetes, but I never want to manage a Kubernetes ever. That's why I have Rick Claus. Like, you know, Rick, the IT pro with the green hat, like Rick, that's why I have Rick, because I don't want to know any of that stuff. Rick, make sure my infrastructure is there so my apps will run correctly. I don't want to know any of it. And think about it. Every tool you hear today is somehow trying to abstract Kubernetes from you. Why? Because nobody, even the IT pros, don't want to manage Kubernetes. It's a nightmare. That's why we have AKS and EKS, is because they're trying to take the control plane away from you so that you don't have to manage it. So you don't have to update the nodes. So you don't have to worry about security. So the statement that no one wants to deal with security, especially developers, 100% agree with that, right? But that's why I use infrastructure as code, right? That's where the teams can come to collaborate. I can tell you what my needs are. You can go and design what it's supposed to be, and we can deploy that continuously and test that our deployments are going to be great. I, as a developer, really don't care. And one of the things that we're working on in my team, so yeah, you're gonna have to have me back once the project is called Radius. Once Radius ships, you're gonna have to have me back, because it addresses a lot of this stuff that you're talking about. It tries to make sure that the developers simply do not have to worry about the infrastructure at all. And when you layer things on like Dapper, I don't even have to know what cloud I'm running in anymore. Like my code has no idea if it's running in AWS, GCP, even in space. Like, and this is a true statement. Dapper is running on the International Space Station right now, and the code running there was actually developed on one of my buddy's machines in, I think he's in somewhere in the central US. I can't remember exactly where Ryan Campbell lives, but it was developed on his machine running in the International Space Station. Software has no idea that it's different, right? That's the power of being able to isolate the developer from infrastructure. So do developers want to be isolated from infrastructure? 100%, right? So that I have no argument with. Is DevOps dead? To me, DevOps is about continuously delivering value, right? And so if you're continuously delivering value, you're doing DevOps if you realize it or not. But I think it would be foolish for us not to have dev, QA, and prod environments, staging environments, places where we can test that the code does what it's supposed to do before it gets into production. Yeah, we test in production, but we don't just throw garbage into production and see if it sticks and lets our customers pay the price for that. Testing in production for me is having two features run side by side to see which one performs better than the other, not throwing garbage over the fence and having our customers tell us that it doesn't work, right? That is just foolish and irresponsible, and you shouldn't do that. So testing in production is not an excuse just to throw garbage over the fence, just like Agile is not an excuse not to design, right? Everyone's like, oh, it means no documentation. Like, that's not what it says, right? The manifesto says we value working software over documentation, not instead of documentation, but people are interpreting it the way that they want to. So I agree with two of the statements that he made, but I don't believe that that means DevOps is dead, right? Because to me, DevOps is so much more than just the automated pipeline. Like, DevOps is about monitoring your application while it's running in production, realizing if what you deployed was actually valuable or not, using that data back in your product backlog to prioritize the things that are left there to make sure that what you deliver next is actually valuable. That's continuously delivering value, right? I don't care what tools you use in between. If you're able to say what we delivered was valuable or not, and then use that information to adjust your product backlog for the next sprint, then I think you're doing DevOps regardless if you're using a particular tool or call it whatever you want. There's GitOps out there now, DevSecOps, DevBizOps, Database Ops, ML Ops. Like, there's all the ops out there right now, right? But to me, it's like, that's all ridiculous, right? It's like, it's all about delivering value to your end user and doing everything that you can to make sure that it's high quality, high performant, resilient, reliable. Do that however you want. But you don't have a separate pipeline for your database and a separate pipeline for your mobile app and a separate pipeline for security. No, it's one pipeline, right? That has security, your database, your mobile app, everything. Because what I'm trying to deploy is a solution. I'm not trying to deploy an individual app. I'm trying to deploy a solution that includes the databases and everything else that goes with it as well. So it's interesting. I hadn't heard that term yet. I agree with his ideas about infrastructure and no one wants to deal with it, but I don't know how that kills DevOps though, because the infrastructure it's a best practice called infrastructure as code, who I'm a big fan of. It's just one like minuscule part of what DevOps is. It's like all DevOps isn't just doing infrastructure as code. So how can abstracting the infrastructure from a developer then kill all the rest of DevOps and what it brings to the table? But what's the future of DevOps? What I hope the future of DevOps is that we're not talking about it anymore, because we've made it so drop dead easy that it's a checkbox. I started my career back at Compaq Computers. And back then I was at like 96. Only the smartest guys on our teams got to go build our CI machines. It was painful. Get the make file just right, get the machine set up so that it can get triggered when someone pushes code to SVS or what is it, SCV or something. There was some weird like source control
subversion.
It doesn't even exist anymore, right? But it was like being able to figure that out was like only the brightest of us could get a CI system working. Now it literally is a checkbox. You check this box and we'll figure it all out, and it'll build every single time you commit code. And I hope that the next checkbox is just DevOps, right? Like, I want DevOps. Boop. I check a box and we just figure out the entire pipeline for you. Like, everything is just done. So I hope that DevOps isn't something that we're still talking about. Still something that we're doing, just like we're still doing continuous integration. We just don't have to work as hard to get the results that we want, because we have to work pretty hard today. Like, it took me 10 blog series to get Web3 into a CI/CD pipeline. Like, it wasn't trivial for me to tweak the way that they think about it, because it was clear when you looked at the templates that they weren't thinking about DevOps when they created these templates. Like, these are things that have to be recompiled for every deployment. Like how, like that's like a step one anti-pattern of DevOps is rebuild your code every time you want to go to another deployment. Like really? Like you want me to rebuild everything before I go from one environment to the next? I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. So I had to go back in and tweak some of their stuff so I could do those things like build once, deploy many kind of mindsets. So, but I hope we make that even easier to do. And I'm thinking now that we're working with Consensus and we're working with the team that actually built Truffle, that I can show them what I found, and maybe we can tweak their templates to where the ultimate goal is that when you say, hey, I want a new Truffle React app, like the pipeline just lays down with it, right? So you're not even having to go figure that out, getting me a step closer to what I just asked for, right? That holy grail of I don't even think about this. I just said I wanted a React app, and next thing I know, I have a React app with a GitHub Actions pipeline, or I have a Azure DevOps pipeline, or a Jenkins pipeline. It just came down ready to do the right thing. And then I think that the question that Martin asked earlier about how do I get startups to do this? We just make it that freaking easy. Like we're going to make it harder to not do the right thing. We're going to make it so easy to do the right thing that when they do a git push, it's just going to start building for them, right? Because if you do a git push with the right file in the right location, we'll just start building that stuff for you. And that's what I want. That's how drop dead simple I want it to be. I created a new app, I pushed it to GitHub, and the next thing I know, pipelines are running. Yep, that's how easy it should be. You shouldn't have to think about this stuff. So that's what I hope the future of DevOps is that we've just made it that freaking easy that everyone does it.
Very cool.
I see that we're almost out of time, but I hope we could squeeze in one last question here. We got a question from Adam here in the chat. Cost in the cloud seems to be a factor. If you extended Azure Data Services and management to something like Dell Technologies on-prem cloud deployments, would that type of environment lead to an upfront fixed cost?
Got it. So the way that I manage cost in the cloud is, again, with infrastructure as code. And again, if you read the blog series that I just wrote on Web3, I delete my dev environment and my QA environment during the approval process. So basically, I deploy to dev. I say, are you happy with what you just saw in dev? Devs have time to go play with it. They say, yep, I'm happy with it. The first thing I do is I delete that entire environment. And then I go and I provision the QA environment, right? And then I say, QA team, are you happy with it? Yep, they go in, do their testing. Like they say, yes. First thing I do is I delete the entire QA environment, right? And then I go and I spin up the prod environment if this is the first deployment, but you never delete the production environment. So what I see people losing money in the cloud is that they leave these environments up that they could easily spin up on demand versus just leaving them running. And the reason that most of them leave them running is because they're not doing infrastructure as code. They went in and they manually clicked around and created an Azure this and an Azure that and a Cosmos this and a Cosmos that. Like, why did you manually do that? Like, use Bicep, use Terraform, use whatever IAC provider that you want, but do not do that stuff by hand. In a perfect world, I would want all my engineers to have only read-only access to Azure. Like, you can go and look around to see if it landed the way that you wanted it to, but the only way to get the code into Azure, the only way to get resources in there is to commit something to your repository. When the pipeline runs, you'll see if it deployed correctly or not. But you can't go in there and right-click and start adding anything into the portal. It has to go through the pipeline to get into the portal. And at that point, you can start safely deleting those entire environments, because you know it only takes a push of a button to stand it back up. So why am I going to pay for VMs to run, Kubernetes clusters to run, Cosmos DBs to run? Why am I going to pay for that stuff to run when no one is using it? Just delete it, and when you need it, spin it back up, and then delete it again, and start saving yourself tons and tons of money. Right? We don't want you spending resources that you're not using. We want you getting the most out of Azure, not seeing a bill that's going to give you a heart attack because you're running environments which were really cheap to run on-prem. Right? On-prem, it's like run it forever. It doesn't matter. We have to pay the electricity and the AC anyway. So like it's a fixed cost for us to run this on-prem. It's not a fixed cost when you're running it in the cloud. So what I teach people to do is use infrastructure as code as your secret weapon to go and delete stuff you don't need and spin it up on demand when you do and save yourself a ton of money. Awesome. You are very, very welcome. This was awesome. And anytime you want me to come and do and ask me anything, I usually say yes to those instantly because I don't have to prepare anything, right? So if you want me back for another AMA, just let me know when, and I'll be more than happy to come back and geek out with you guys for sure. But thanks for having me.
Yeah, Donovan,
Cool, Donovan.
Thank you very much for your time, insight, and just sharing your passion. I always love chatting with you. And I do have it on recording that you want us to bring you back again. But
yeah, especially when Radius, watch my Twitter feed. As soon as you see me release Radius, you have to have me come back and tell you about that, because the product is it's getting to the point where I'm like, all right, I get it, right? At first I didn't see it, but now I'm like, okay, I'm starting to see it. Like this is gonna be big, and that's what incubation teams are supposed to do. So when it's ready, you just say, Donovan, I think saw you tweet something about Radius. Can you come back and tell us about it? I'd be happy to tell you about it.
Sure, I'll do that. But in the meantime, again, thank you very much. I know it's late for you, and have a great rest of the evening. And
Thank you so
we'll chat
much.
again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you very much, Donovan. Right, Shay, over to you. Can I ask you to introduce our next guest, please?
Thank you so much, Billy. It is my pleasure to invite Mr. Jason Walker here. When I first read Jason Walker's resume, I was like really spellbound. He used to be a helicopter pilot with the US Marines, and then he goes on and spends a decade at Activision Blizzard and working on some cutting edge technologies on the AIOps side. And yeah, now he's gone over to BigPanda, where he leads the customer success operations team. And he's here to talk to us about AIOps. And this marries two of my very favorite passions, AI and ops together. So I'm super looking forward to hear more from what Jason has to say. So without much further ado, Jason.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Shay. I really appreciate it. And that was really interesting hearing Donovan talk. I was just going back to my old life before I joined Panda, when I was not flying helicopters, but actually working at Activision Blizzard and running their services. And when he was going through the incidents, I was just like, you know what? I remember our DevOps engineers just suffering through, all the typical dysfunctions that you hear about. But I'm actually here to talk about AIOps and about kind of how AIOps can be applied to the DevOps problem. And we traditionally go with like big IT teams, big organizations with NOCs. But if you think about the application of AI and automation to the ops problem, and what a network operations center or a command center, global operations center, whatever an organization calls it, what they deal with day in, day out in a lot of ways. And for some of the folks who have come to BigPanda, what they do is they automate the NOC. They automate that entire function. And I think yes, I work for BigPanda, but I'm also a big believer in AIOps. So I will call up some slides. I hope that's okay. I know this was supposed to be not slideless, but definitely interactive. So I encourage everybody, I'm watching the chat and I will be throughout. But if I don't catch your note, then please just let me know and I will, I'll address it there. There we go. All right. So can you see my screen?
It's still coming up.
Okay. My screen sharing is paused. That's an interesting one. All right. Off to a good start. All right. Let me just take us out of presentation mode here. And we'll try again. So, all right, now you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So I'll try to take it full screen. Still good?
Yes, it's full screen.
Awesome. Thank you. So what we've realized and what I definitely realized is that modern tech ops, AI ops, DevOps, IT ops, super complex. And I think about you guys over here, DevOps, SREs, some of the best engineers I worked with, kind of at the end of this long chain of events. Does this look familiar to anybody, or is this kind of out of your lane?
Familiar, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, this was my bread and butter for about a decade, and just trying to run this entire process and making sure nobody got left behind, and we kept all of our services available. And these were the services, and hopefully some folks recognize some of these, but a lot of big games titles. We were running our own network backbone. We were running multiple cloud and on-prem environments, massive data center presence, huge spend everywhere. And whole lot of individuality across each of the teams, from DevOps, SRE, app dev, database, traditional IT functions, just a lot of uniqueness. And as a result, this was a homegrown tool we built for incident management. Our incidents looked like this, and that's a timeline right there on the left scrolling by, and it's a long one, and I remember it well. It was pretty painful, and we ran about 15 to 50 of those a week. And DevOps engineers from all over the business really suffered. It's a very painful experience, I think. But this is your typical incident. This is your typical issue that occurs. And you don't know at first that it's a network configuration issue. And I'll just turn on the laser pointer really quick. You don't know at first that it's a network configuration, BGP change, egrip, whatever. But then the game servers lose their connection and the databases lose their connection. And then you get all those symptomatic effects, which may or may not be picked up by your monitoring. And then the operational response starts. And you got pages going out individually. You have Slack channels lighting up. And you, across a big organization, have multiple teams looking at this thing from all different angles. And nobody really is cohesively coming together. And that's a huge problem. And there's a huge amount of inefficiency in this and how you address this. And it doesn't have to be a network issue. It can be an application issue. It can be an infrastructure issue. Could be an AWS region going down. Could be any number of things not going right in a CI/CD pipeline. But this is the problem: is you're massively inefficient, and you're worried, and you're burning your people out. And the cost estimates are all over the place. But definitely, there's an organizational cost to this. And I think velocity is the number one thing that I think of, especially when it comes to games development. For me, it was all about new content, getting new stuff out there. So we tried to push as fast as we could to keep the players, who are fairly demanding as an audience, to keep them satisfied. And so we were always balancing between change and stability, and not doing a great job because we had lots of data volume and complexity, I'll say. And if you think about ops as actually like a domain, good operations, running your services reliably, they've really been outpaced by all of the change. And if you look at most organizations, they're using something like this, which is 25, 30 years old at this point. And yes, here's enterprise DevOps. They've slightly updated the chart since 1995, but they actually, if you think about big IT, most big corporations, and definitely the marketplace, the big solutions, the ServiceNows out there, the BMC Remedies, the big ticketing companies, they've basically created this universe where there are thousands of silos. And DevOps, I mean, if you, as a DevOps engineer or as an SRE, or if you're just in operations, your job is to keep services running, regardless of where you are, you're going to touch a lot of these. You're not going to have just one. And really, what we see, and across the hundreds of customers BigPanda has, we see this creating silos. It creates bureaucracy. It creates tickets. It's a giant ticket generation machine, because I mean, there's a lot of consumption models out there and the vendors that sell this stuff. And then I think particularly salient for the DevOps audience, there are a lot of ocean boiling standardization efforts out there where, hey, we want to convert everybody to Dynatrace, or we want everybody to use this change process, and you're going to log everything this way, or everybody has to migrate to this tool. And you don't get much for that. And usually it really is ocean boiling. It never gets there. And that's costly. And so at Blizzard, and now that I'm working for BigPanda, we were looking for a different solution. And really, we wanted to address the big challenges we saw across DevOps, the fragmentation of awareness and knowledge in operations, the high change velocity leading to a real lack of traceability to incidents, and then tool and process autonomy. That's something DevOps engineers and SREs, they want to be able to change monitoring tools. They want to be able to change out their stack, their change stack, like everything they use. They want flexibility. And that's kept very counter to this. That flexibility in tools, like everybody has some sort of tools consolidation or rationalization effort going on right now. But people are better with tools that they love and they use every day. And so you have to enable that. You can't fight it. And that's a fundamental tension that exists out there today between kind of the old guard of ITIL and what I would say is the winning strategy of DevOps and SRE. So enter into that BigPanda where, yes, we turn lots of dots and different colors into nice straight lines without those little dots, and things look cleaner, right? But obviously it goes beyond marketing. And really AIOps, what have we divided AIOps into at BigPanda is really these 4 things. And I think we're the first ones to ever do this. And this is something I bought in 2019 for my team at Blizzard. And within a year, because I came to BigPanda in 2020, we cut our incident volume in half and scaled up our services massively. We just got rid of a lot of the noise. And I would really chalk that up to data engineering, which nobody's ever applied data engineering fundamentals to the real-time event stream, to your topology data and to your change data, and said, hey, you need to normalize this, you need to filter it, you need to join it, you need to enrich it, and then you need to process it in some way. And of course, using AI to do that is a great way to process it. Using AI to join, multiple data points with lots of attributes that have more dimensions than a human mind can really keep up with is a great way to solve the ops problem. And so that's what BigPanda did. And it doesn't do it in a fancy way. It does it in the same way that Gmail identifies spam. I mean, that is a very successful application of ML principles. And so it's not magic, and it never will be. And I think anybody in DevOps knows that there is, like, I liked Donovan's talk about, I want it to be push button. And I would love for DevOps to be push button, but you introduce a little breakage somewhere, a little flaw into that system. And all of a sudden that push button, you have to go back and understand every step along the way to figure out what went wrong. And then you have to fix it. You have to remediate it. You have to isolate root cause, and you have to remediate in some way. Even if you're fully containerized, running on K8, so you can just wipe the whole thing and start over, you still have to figure out what went wrong and adapt to it, and adapt your services to it. And so these 4 big services are really what BigPanda has divided AIOps into: data engineering, incident intelligence, workflow automation, and unified analytics, because analyzing the data, understanding it, doing the long cycle changes to understand where your failure points, your recurring failure points are, or which changes go badly every time. Super important to have that kind of longitudinal view. And then an AI engine under the whole thing. So I cannot see the chat for some reason. Any questions in there?
I don't see any questions in the chat yet, but as I'm seeing you share this, there's a burning question in my head. All this looks super comprehensive. How do we start rolling this out, and where do we start?
That's a great question. So really go left to right. For us, well, I'll just break it up. Really, we've modularized the entire process of going out, and this is fairly brand new, and I hope you guys can see that. Really, yeah, there's a value prop up at the top, but data engineering, we're going to come in modularly, and the first thing we're going to do is take all of your monitoring tools, everything you have at your organization from every team that we can locate, or 2 of them, if that works for you. And we're going to say, hey, let's start ingesting all of your alerts from your monitoring and putting them in one place. We'll normalize them in the process of doing that. And maybe we'll do some basic parsing and break out, the payload in any typical, alert payload. And let's break it up into its component parts. And maybe we can identify an environment, a region, even a host, some sort of node, an application. But whatever you have in that payload, we're going to break it out into parts, and we'll call those discrete things in different object classes. And then maybe we'll do some filtering around the stuff that is noise. Maybe we'll exclude, because it's production environments, maybe at that point we'll exclude your Datadog events that are coming from your dev and staging and QA environments. And we'll definitely deduplicate stuff from Splunk or something that has a high kind of flapping rate. And we have kind of levers that you can pull on to do that, to get down to actual alerts and get you to the point where, okay, now we're getting signal from all of our monitoring systems, and we've put them into a single pane of glass, or the first pane of glass, as we call it. And it's much cleaner than having those tools all over the place, which, you know, if you think about this all the way back. Nice transitions. If you think about the world before you put anything in the middle, all these monitoring systems would go to various places and be handled in various different ways, and they'd really be fragmented at that point. The guys that really love Dynatrace, or the infrastructure engineers who are deep in Nagios, or the network engineers who are in Kentic, or any type of, you know, network monitoring system, they would see whatever their world was, and they'd view the entire problem from that perspective. If you put them all in one place, then all of a sudden you get a very consolidated view. And you can start doing things that, and this is the next step, Shay, is they give you intelligence around them. You can start taking any enrichment maps that you have, and we see typically 200 to 300 enrichment maps from all the different sources of service maps and CMDBs and ITAMs and even security tools. We'll bring those maps in and try to match up any alert to all the topology information you have about it across network, application, app to host, and then service mapping, like what is everything that makes up a large scale service? Well, usually it's a lot. And if we can say, hey, this service is having problems, there's a service level indicator. Maybe for us at Blizzard, it was players. If we started dropping players precipitously faster than normal human log in, log off rates, then that would be a service level indicator. And we'd look at the other alerts that occurred at the same time and correlate them together into a package, into a payload that we could actually show to the whoever was responding to that. And then we could pass that on. Let's say you get through all of these modes, and I would like to spend some time on change and change integration and how we look at that. But then you can pass it on to, hey, if it looks like a priority 1 or priority 2, and you can do rules based, or you can try to let us decide, then we're going to send it on to PagerDuty immediately. We'll send it on to XMatters. We'll send it on to you to Slack, and we'll give you a payload in there to say, here is everything we know about this incident. Please join the incident channel, or come to BigPanda and look at the incident. And there, we're going to show you a timeline. We're going to show you which changes we saw occur at the same time, that we're also ingesting. That's part of incident intelligence. What changes happened at the same time as these alerts came in, or in rough proximity, and how far do you want to zoom out? Having all that in one place lets you really isolate what's going on. So I hope, does that answer your question, Shay, about how you'd start to roll it out?
Absolutely. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is most of the input is still derived from existing tools, but then it's the analysis aspect that BigPanda does, and acts as somewhat of a hub that continues to interact with other tools like PagerDuty, etc.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Because we decided early on, and I think everybody who tries to solve the ops problems for large organizations realizes, like, you can't displace every other tool that already exists there. So whether you're using whatever change tools you're using, or whatever remediation tools you're using, whether it's Ansible or Git or GitHub, whatever ticketing system you're using, if it's Jira, if it's ServiceNow, if it's Remedy, and definitely whatever monitoring tools you're using, let's let you keep that, but tie them together and normalize the data coming from them, because all of them have their own formatting and their own configurations that they want to send direct to you and act like they're the only operations tool that exists. But it very much is an ecosystem, and you have to connect them in order to run your operation effectively. So yeah, that's the nuts and bolts, and it's a pick and choose for any organization. You can, if you just want to do chat ops, you just want to go straight to Slack, you can go small, and you can start off with a very easy goal of just noise reduction. Just give me something that gives me filters around all the noise, because I don't want to I know a lot of my network monitoring is noise, or I know a lot of the things that I've configured in an old tool, an App Dynamics, a New Relic. I know their noise and I want to exclude them, and I want to just monitor my production environments in a different way and hook that up to my paging or hook that up to my chat. It really lets you choose how you want to run operations. So yeah, that's the nuts and bolts of it. And I think you know, absolutely, you know, we believe in alert quality. We know organizations have problems with that. We know DevOps teams get paged 5 times for the same incident because alerting is hard to maintain, and it seems to be a function of time. And we know actionability is key. And then automation is the solve for everything that you know what you want to do. And that's one way that we see DevOps teams using us is we are a great payload normalizer for any auto remediation that you want to do. Because all of this serves to give you a nice consistent output to Ansible to run your playbook or any other tool that you want to use. It's actually pretty, like we used, what was it? Stackstorm was our primary other one. And the remediation depended on the service. It wasn't a one size fits all. So we had to be super flexible. If you just want to direct somebody to a run book, you can also automate that. And so it's very flexible that way. And then, you know, how do we use AI? We try to predict things. We try to predict noise. We'll try to predict priority, or we'll try to put together a better correlation pattern for you so you can group your alerts more effectively. But we don't say the AI knows all and is, you know, kind of Hollywood AI and just can see problems without anything. No, we use it in a practical way, which I think is the only way to really use AI. So I think maybe a good segue, and how are we doing on time? We're over time. Do I have to stop, Shay, or do you want me to keep going?
No, please carry on. I'm learning a lot.
Yeah, so I think one of our best customers was Expedia, because they came to us with a whole bunch of different ops stacks and tech stacks that ran their operations, because they were actually, you know, a large M&A, mergers and acquisitions. They put together a large company, and they had to consolidate operations on the one hand, but also keep driving each of these brands, each of these services at full speed. And they had a very robust DevOps presence across the company, and just they were running as modern as they could. They started off with us in 2019, same time as I did. I remember actually talking to them about how to solve some of the same problems when I was at Blizzard. And then they centralized some of their AIOps, like L1, L2, the initial response, and then really tried to use them as kind of the organizational normalization for all operations. And they had incredibly strong IT, DevOps, and SRE at the L3 layer, but they wanted to preserve those for project velocity to get things done. And they knew they had a lot of noise, and they had a lot of diversity in their respective stacks and processes. And so they really wanted to fix that. And so ever since they got BigPanda, they've and kind of embraced AIOps as a methodology, they've been on kind of a continued progression of, hey, let's put more and more through this same pipeline over time. And they still have a long way to go, but they've done great so far. Just in terms of their scale, I mean, big company, I think anybody can recognize a lot of variety across all of this. And that's, you know, kind of the nature of modern service operations. You can't simplify. You can simplify it maybe at first, but after 5 years, your stack will start to grow and be hard to manage. Some of their challenges: DevOps autonomy culture and information silos, subscale efficiencies. It's a great word. Everybody running their own ops stack and process, and not a lot of cross-team visibility. And hey, your microservice just impacted mine. Very frequent conflicts just because they were trying to migrate various pieces to a common platform in a bunch of different places. And inevitably you get failures that impact the blast radius is beyond just your own service. And so just high velocity deployment frequency, increased risk to production stability. They were experiencing that all the time. And they're pretty good. I mean, if you go to Expedia, if you go to any of their sites, any of their services, my personal experience has been they run pretty well, but they have a very high bar for service availability. High noise levels, difficult to achieve holistic end-to-end visibility across hybrid environments and multiple tools. Great mouthful right there. And impossible to standardize key operational metrics. How do you measure DevOps performance? Well, you can use DORA, or you can use a lot of different ways, but service availability really matters a lot. And then just operational performance specifically, your change failure rates, your change success rates, and then your service availability as the core and unifying that. But you get into the operational metrics like MTTA, MTTD, and they had a really interesting one, mean time to know, MTTK. When did you actually know what the problem was? And that spoke to how fast they could isolate a given problem. So yeah, this is the pipeline that they set up. And this is where a lot of folks that embrace AIOps get to. I've seen about 15 different variants on this same chart, but it's basically a whole bunch of input data right here. Sometimes there is an event bus or some sort of pre-enrichment before you send it to BigPanda. They were a very engineering heavy company, and they wanted to do that. You don't have to. Then you bring in your historical data around every incident that's ever run ever, and the alerts associated with it. And that's a data set that we join. And then you bring in your maintenance plan. Hey, intentional maintenance is going to cause alerting. Let's suppress that while the maintenance is ongoing. And you bring all that in, and change sources, anomaly detection metrics, everything. And you bring it into one place. You go through that data engineering, incident intelligence, workflow automation, unified analytics process that I talked about. And then you hook it up to all of your response tools. All of this incident response here, from your chat ops and your paging and notification to your ticketing systems, if you're a ticket-centric organization. But yeah, you bring it in on one end, real-time event stream, apply the historical data, apply the known other known factors that can be involved in operations, and then you output, you improve the outputs to your real-time processes. So this is how they said it. And that's why I think this, I can tell you about my experience and running operations at Activision Blizzard, but I think Expedia really got the savings, and they did not waste time on non-incidents. They fixed actionability for the things that they're running through, for the things that they are continuing to run through BigPanda. Yeah, better incident response, definitely something management will be very interested in. Operational efficiency at scale. It gives you kind of commonality and just brings everybody up to a baseline of performance, no matter how mature the service is or how mature the team is. And then improvement in mean time to remediate. That's what AIOps can do for you. And I don't want to, I believe in AIOps. BigPanda is a great product. It happens to be an AIOps, but I think the philosophy itself is actually very strong. I don't think modern services can really use the outdated ITIL methodology, and DevOps goes really far, but it's at a service level generally. And I think for an organization, you need one notch out from that. And I think DevOps plus AIOps is a good combination. Yeah, so a lot of noise, and they do have a ton of monitoring over there. But this is the big one, is all the incidents they run. How long does it take to resolve? How much time do people spend going after those incidents? How much organizational effort is there? Well, the orange bars are incidents that don't run through BigPanda, and the green bars are incidents that do run through BigPanda. And yes, you can see that the value is really in the difference between those two things. And my hat is off to the Expedia teams who have embraced this, because I watched them go through this process over a period of 3 years. And they had to take all those brands, and all those DevOps engineers had to kind of embrace a new philosophy and work with a decentralized but centralized, centralized processes and centralized point with BigPanda, they all had to input into that. And luckily the tool makes it pretty easy to do that, but they worked really hard to achieve these numbers, and the technology worked when applied correctly. So I guess I'll leave you guys with their recommendations and best practices, which I absolutely believe in. And that is when you're approaching AIOps, and I'm sure some of you after this, hopefully, will read about AIOps and you'll see a bunch of marketing speak and a whole bunch of hype. But when you actually get down to the meat and potatoes, I think you'll probably find, hey, there's actually domain agnostic AIOps, the application of AI and automation to the ops problem. It's a real thing, and it is a strategy to deal with running your services reliably. But yeah, think through your metadata and enrichment strategy. Enrichment is everything. The way you generate topology data and use it matters a lot. Bring as much monitoring as you can. Use the analytics for continuous improvement. You have to analyze your process and see how it's running, the same as you would do for any service optimization, for any application you're trying to build, any resource utilization. You want to do the same thing with operations. It's not any different. You need to analyze and understand. And then, yeah, use BigPanda to find chronic issues in toil. One of the great things out of our analytics is that alert that goes off 3,000 times a day that nobody ever answers actually gets highlighted and flagged, and you can finally get rid of it or fix it so it only fires when there's an actual issue. And these are, recommendations, best practices, realistic and pragmatic. I think that's something every DevOps engineer, every SRE I've ever met has embraced. They're very pragmatic people by nature. Drive alignment early on. So acknowledge the diversity in tools and systems and processes, and say that, hey, we still need to maintain service availability, and we have to operate as a large team, not as a whole bunch of siloed teams. The business case kind of writes itself, and BigPanda will be happy to help you with that. And then whenever you do any sort of organizational change, it's a great opportunity. It's kind of a behavior change delivery vehicle. Any tool that you bring in gives you a chance to reevaluate how you're doing things to improve it. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. I really appreciate the time, and now I'll stop sharing. And looks like a few people stuck around. Hope it was beneficial. And open if anybody has any.
I'm not seeing any immediate questions, Jason, but I can say that I absolutely relate. In my previous organization, we brought in Dynatrace and we brought in PagerDuty. And what we initially ended up noticing was that there were so many alerts that our operations team, which was offshore, pretty much switched their phones off, and they stopped looking at these alerts because there were so many. But I guess the reality of the situation was that there were so many false positives and so many, known 500 errors that nobody wanted to fix. But, now I feel like if I could go back in time, I would recommend BigPanda to them.
It's people don't acknowledge it, but we see, we have hundreds of customers, and we see anywhere from, I've seen 4 nines of noise. People are spending massive amounts of money and time and effort with what is 99.99% noise, because we actually measure actionability. Like, what do you actually, when an alert comes in, do you take action on it or not? We actually measure that and report it back. And when we see 99.99% noise, we say, let's bucket some of that and get rid of the really bad offenders in there. And it's a hard conversation, because you get into some real religious differences about how monitoring should be done. And and it's because it's so diffused across the larger organization. It's nobody's job to get rid of noise. Like, if you think about that, whose job is it to get rid of noise at a large organization? Individual engineers, but they don't really see it. And I'm really reluctant to touch somebody's monitoring that came before me, and I inherited their service, and now I want to go back and undo everything they did. No way. I'm not going to take that risk. Maybe that's the most important alert that ever fired, and that major incident will fall back on me. So there's I think there's tacit acknowledgement in the community that there are deep-seated issues with the way large organizations do ops, and there's huge frictions around them. But I think AIOps actually tackles that problem and says, no, there's a way to do it. We have a maturity model, and it goes all the way up to autonomous operations, which is kind of the nirvana state of an alert comes in, root cause gets isolated and defined, and then a remediation is launched, and all you get is a report saying you're welcome. But we've only seen a couple of services at a couple of organizations actually get to that point, because it's hard to do, but you can do it. And once you get a few, then other people start to recommend it. And even if you get halfway there and some of your problems are automated, the toil reduction is just massive across the org. So
had over 100,000 on a weekend.
It kind of defies belief. Like, we'll go to an organization, they'll say, we have 200,000 incidents a month. And we're like, oh, you must be AWS or some other massive service out there. And like, no, there's some little podunk bank somewhere in, the Midwest. And you're like, how many nodes do you have? Is everything failing all the time? Like, are you out of business? And they say, no, we have 200,000 incidents, believe us. And we just look at them like, well, how many of those are real? And they're like, yeah, 15.
And actionable, like going to the right person.
Yeah. And going to the right person, which is the other thing. Like, it's kind of like a meeting. The more people attending, the more expensive it gets. And the more passes of that ticket, like, well, it looks like noise to me, but I'm not going to close it. They will just pass that ticket around the table, and it goes up to like the senior most guy, who might be the only one who has the tribal knowledge to say, hey, this is real and I know what to do with it, or this is noise and I'm willing to say that. And it's very expensive. Like, we tried to calculate, it gets really complicated to calculate, but I think it's a real pain point. I think it's something that I will say there's a lot of hype in the market, but we try to stay pretty real, at least at BigPanda, which is why I switched. Blizzard is a pretty good company. I think BigPanda actually, great little startup. We're at like 400 employees now, and charging hard, development side, and really data science. It's awesome to see, the big brains come into the room and untangle that stuff. But yeah, it's a great place to be. So Shay, I don't really know how to end it. You can give him my email, you can give him my contact information. We have a whole sales force that'll be happy to talk to you. I'm Chief Customer Officer, but I'd love to hear from anybody what you thought of the presentation. I'm trying, DevOps has moved a lot, and it still is. And I would love to hear, people's perceptions of AIOps, and just, what they think of the problems in ops today from a DevOps and SRE perspective, if you have it. And then how you think maybe AIOps should be applied to that, or could be applied to that.
If I could just squeeze one more last question, as it's actually a perfect segue to what you just said.
Yeah.
So a question from the audience is that, can you implement the software or try it out? So are there any like trial versions available?
So it's really interesting. Yes, there absolutely is. We will pair you up with one of our engineers and we have a consumption model that we've been working on, because we think that's a good way to price it, rather than nodes and subscription. And it gets pretty expensive on that side. And we'll actually hook you up. And sometimes we do that in hours. I've seen 15 data sources pulled in and run through that data engineering module. We've actually automated it, just had a solution architect script out the whole thing to almost all of data engineering through correlation. We'd be happy to run you through that. I think it would be really cool. You won't get it to it on the webpage. Like, you can't just click and say, try it out, because, well, you guys would throw about 3 billion events per second at us if we open that up to everybody and crush our, like we do. We are a business. So, but yeah, absolutely. And you don't need a consulting team to help analyze the streams of data, not at all. We have out of the box dashboards that'll work from the moment you start sending events in. So yeah, real easy to get started. Another long-winded answer, sorry.
No, thank you so much, Jason. I mean, we truly appreciate the time that you took to share all of this information. And like you said, we would be sharing your information out so that our community can reach out and ask any questions.
Absolutely. All right.
Billy, anything in closing?
No, nothing really.